One of the things that seems to confuse players in Wreckfest is the difficulty settings and tuning settings, what they do and how they work. Today I intend on enlightening you a little bit on how these work, demonstrating their effects on my car and what in my opinion is the best setting to use for the average player. This is the science of Wreckfest. Let's start with stability control. In fact, no. Before I start, I'm going to be separating this up into a couple of videos, probably 3 or 4, because it's quite easy to spend a fair amount of time like discussing all of the different effects and what they do to your car. We also don't want to be paying attention to my position in the races, that doesn't really matter. We do want to be paying attention to how much more input I'm going to be having on the vehicle. You'll see as we start playing I have an overlay of my controller which will be showing all my inputs. I think that's pretty handy for you to get a gauge on how much more I'm having to do to keep the car in line. Let's get started. Stability control is slightly more complicated than traction control, so we'll start there. In short, it makes the car more stable in cornering. Okay, fine. I'll explain how it does it then, if I must. So as you come into a corner after braking, you'll begin to turn. As you turn, stability control will track each wheel individually and apply a slight amount of braking to the ones losing traction, typically the outside rear and outside front tyre, which in turn has the effect of straightening out your car a bit, but not so much that you lose tons of oversteer to it or a lot of RPM. This way you tend to get sort of smoother and flowier turns without losing too much speed, making your cornering a little bit faster. It's affected by your brake bias and differential lock because, well, it needs the brakes to function, so fully rear biased brakes will have less of an effect on stability control compared to equally biased brakes, and of course a fully locked diff will make both your drive wheels, gain and lose speed at the same rate, so as it tries to brake your rear wheels you'll just start slowing down because they're locked. It's suited to basically any rear wheel drive car, but more so the powerhouses as I refer to them. Stuff like Road Slayer, Hammerhead and Venoms, etc. So what are the practical effects of stability control when you're driving? Well, first we'll watch a game and I'll try to show you how stability control is affecting the car. I'll show you races with different combinations of the stability control settings and we'll see if we can find the best setting, because I don't think it's half of half, which, if you don't know, is half ABS, traction control off, and half stability control, which commonly is thought to be best. We'll start with half off half, then we'll go to half off full, and then we'll turn stability control off entirely and see how it affects the car. Let's get started. So notice as we're going around corners how I'm able to keep a relative amount of power down and just steer into it to keep it balanced. I haven't got to decelerate at all, and I don't have to put as much effort in as I would have to if I were to run no stability control at all. I'm still having to put a considerable amount in though. Watch here as I transition from dirt to tarmac to dirt. I'll begin turning when I'm on the tarmac, and I'll lose some traction as I transfer onto the dirt. When you're running no stability control at all, what you'll find when you do something like this is the car will have a tendency to immediately spin, or try to spin, as much as possible. But because of the stability control, it doesn't. Watch how, because I've used half stability control for such a long time, I understand what's going to happen to the car as I put it into a corner, so I can figure out roughly what angle I'm going to have to turn in, and then I basically don't have to do anything on the controller aside from accelerate. You'll see me do this on a couple of corners. You're going to see the car to my right here bump my corner very slightly. Now, with a fully locked diff and no stability control, pretty likely that with how well I can drive using that setup, that it would have spun me out. You'll see what I mean in a second. I also lag out a little bit, but that's fine. So, what can we tell from that? Well, we can tell primarily that I'm fairly good at driving with half stability control. I managed to play that little, it wasn't an attempted spin, but we see that I can play that little bump that I got into the corner quite well, whereas no stability control I'd have probably crashed or certainly had to slow down a hell of a lot. Let's see how I drive with full stability control. So what you should be noticing, I'll cut this video a little bit less than I did this one, although I didn't cut much this race. What you should be noticing is that I'm basically not putting any input in at all to the driving. I'm also drifting less because you'll lose some speed as you try and drift with the stability control on. We can also see that I'm about to enter into a bit of a fustercluck. Stability control absolutely saved me here. If I had it off, I would have crashed. No doubt about it. You'll also notice that the yellow and white TriStar that just hit me pulled away. So something that stability control has the effect of is it makes your car feel heavier to hit. So if someone were to try and spin you, say, like he did, I don't really know if he tried to spin me or not. I don't really think it was an actual attempted spin, but when he made contact, whereas with stability control off, my car would have just folded around him immediately. It didn't. Instead, he turned into me, I turned against him, and I basically just held my line perfectly fine. Now, for something like semi-clean where I am now and clean racing, that's not so much of a problem. But if you're in a dirty server, that's definitely something worth taking into account. Having that kind of an effect, especially when you've got a heavier car, will be very advantageous to you. Something it's worth paying attention to is how I'm putting a hell of a lot less input into the controller. Typically driving with full stability control is easier than driving with no stability control or half stability control. Granted, it can be slower. When you put the car fully sideways into a corner, like you'll see me do, you'll notice that I lose a few more revs than I would normally, but ultimately it's up to you. If you're in a dirty server, you will find it easier to fight other players with full stability control compared to having none at all or half, so it's worth taking that into account. You'll see compared to the next clip how much harder of a time I have driving with no stability control at all. Okay then, now let's turn off stability control and cry for a moment while we crash a lot and generally have a bad time driving. Watch here as the car to my right hand side barely taps me and I almost completely lose control. This is a bit of a wake-up call to me, reminding me that, yeah, I'm driving with no stability control and I need to actually pay attention and try a lot harder than I previously was. There wasn't really any way of avoiding nearly being spun there. With the amount of time I had to react, it would have been basically impossible, and anything I could have done would have been to negligible effect. This is one of the disadvantages that you'll find with no stability control, is that if you're in any kind of close quarters with other drivers, and they aren't, say, willing to be kind to you like they might be in a clean racing server, even in a semi-clean racing server, players aren't nice, as you would say. Like, you get bumped around, and yeah, sometimes you get terrible players who just corner bomb you, but they're the exception. You'll also notice that I crashed someone off the track in a second. There was a patch recently-ish, no, it wasn't that recent, where they made dirt off of the track super icy, so you have very little to no traction. That combined with stability control means that basically I'm going to get spun out the moment that this car to my right touches me, and so I steer left to avoid him. Player comes up from nowhere and just gets crashed out. There was very little I could have done to avoid it, and even if I could have done something, I would have just been crashed out anyway. You'll start to notice now, coming onto the last lap, that I've kind of gotten my aim in, as it were. I've figured out pretty much how far I can push the car, and I start to do a reasonably good lap. Also notice how we've cut our lap time from 1 minute and 12 to 1 minute and 7. We've not exactly had a great race so far, but even still that shows that I'm getting faster, and you'll see that this last lap is, I think, 1 minute and 6, so we do definitely speed up. Even though we're still holding a higher gear than we probably should be for the corners that we're taking. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? And what stability control do I think the average player should use? Well, ultimately it comes down to 4 things. Are you driving a front-wheel drive car? If so, then you probably don't need it at all. What class car are you driving? For a C-class, I'd suggest for the average player using either full or half. I don't think it's a coincidence that I won when I was using full stability control. I'd done quite a few races to try and get one where I didn't win, and I won all of them. Bottom line is, it's easier with full stability control, so you can focus on your lines much more. For a B and A class, the same applies. However, you might find using half traction control will help you corner a bit better. I'll cover that more in depth in the next part of this series. How experienced are you in Wreckfest and other racing games? The more experienced racers will find half or even no stability control easier for them because, well, they don't find it as hard to maintain a line as less experienced players in Wreckfest do. As I've said before, experience is far more valuable than a handful of memorised rules, and this absolutely applies in this case. And finally, what kind of server are you playing in? If you're in a clean server like Black Flag 1 or Manteln, then you can probably get away with no stability control at all, but they're a great place to practice lines and such. If you're in a server without rules, like Black Flag 4, then, well, you will find it easier to fight off players with full stability control. When they try to spin you out, you'll have more time to react, and they'll have a harder time crashing you out off the track, allowing you to get the edge and put them in a wall or something. I know a lot, if not all of my viewers are clean racers, but these servers do exist, and, well, they're fun to play. The game is called Wreckfest for a reason. Ultimately, though, I can't decide what the best setting for you to use is. The only person who can decide that is, well, you. Full is probably the easiest to drive with, and will probably be faster for the average player than running no stability control at all, but technically speaking, no stability control is the fastest. Albeit, is it the fastest for me? Well, no, clearly not. My PB on the track you just saw me drive on, Sandstone Alt Route, I did with half, half, half. So it's more about how you drive, I think. And I don't know how you drive. All that being said, thank you for watching. Feel free to let me know your opinions in the comments below, and how do you like not having any music? I think it's kind of plain, but if you like it, I'll keep with it. Be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss the other parts of this series, where I'll be covering tuning and traction control. Now, go and race some, will you?